a young man arrived by train in a new city, where he had been directed to work. Searching for a place to live, he contacted a local realtor to help him find an apartment. They met at night and headed to the apartment for him to move in. Approaching the building, the young man was alarmed by its unwelcoming appearance. It felt like no one had lived there for a long time. However, the realtor cheered him up, stating that it was an excellent deal for just $200. In reality, the house seemed deserted and eerily unwelcoming. Yet, the low rental price convinced the young man to go inside and proceed to the 4th floor, where the apartment he intended to move into was located. But many years later, in the world of the living where there were no dragons and people led normal lives, having reached the 4th floor and opened the apartment door, it also appeared very gloomy. The realtor handed over the keys and chose not to enter the apartment. Wishing the young man a good night, he hurried away as quickly as possible. Once the door closed behind him, the realtor was relieved to have finally rented out the apartment by the end of the month, ensuring he would receive a bonus at work. Going down the stairs, he remembered an old woman who lived there telling stories about ghosts in the house, but he dismissed it as mere superstition. Lost in thought, he didn't notice the creepy hands reaching out behind him, intending to push him. Meanwhile, exhausted from the journey, the young man lay down in bed and fell into a deep sleep, forgetting to close the window through which heavy rain was pouring. The weather was harsh, with bright lightning and loud thunder periodically disrupting the nighttime silence. The young man lay there, unaware of the thunder or the eerie monster watching him which dwelt in the house. This demon was of colossal size, giving the impression that the young man would not survive the night. Morning came, and Miss Long called an officer to her house to help wake up the man lying on the stairs. The realtor woke up to a slap on his cheek and was frightened to see the woman standing very close to his face. The officer and the old lady looked at him with clear suspicion, and he couldn't understand what was happening. Trying to collect himself, he explained that he had rented out an apartment and was on his way home when suddenly someone pushed him, and he lost consciousness. The officer began taking his statement, trying to figure out what had happened in the house that night. Grandma Long looked at the realtor with disdain, making him feel uncomfortable. She warned him many times that the house was haunted and that he should not rent to others, but he continued to ignore her advice in an attempt to make more money. The man laughed and said that nowadays everyone knows that ghosts don't exist, and if she told his client about it, he wouldn't believe her either. His overconfidence and unwillingness to listen to her made Granny Long very angry, and she said that the boy he had brought into the house tonight had been killed because of him. After her words, the man stopped smiling. He realized that a tragedy had occurred and the man he had brought tonight had indeed died, while he lay unconscious on the stairs. Rumors went around the town that someone had died in this mysterious house during the night. When people came to the house, they began to put forward their theories of what had happened. At this moment, a man stood right behind the group of people, examining the building. He did not sense any demonic presence in the building. As he got closer, he used a more powerful power. He had the golden nether eye ability. After using it, he could see every part of this house, but he still couldn't understand where the spirit that Grandma Long said was hidden, and who killed the guy that night. He realized that the investigation would be a dead end because there were no clues left. Realizing the complexity of the situation, he was curious to figure it out. Such complicated and confusing stories made him especially eager to find the ghost. After a moment of using magic, he disappeared so as not to draw attention to himself and jumped on the roof of the building. What he had just used was called Taoism art, walking on the roof of the building. He thought that if his golden nether eye ability couldn't find the demonic aura, then he would have to destroy the building to lure the demon out. But since there were many people living in the building, he wanted to come up with another plan to trap the demon and give it a real beating. The next day came and people had forgotten about the mysterious death of the guy. As well as in the real estate agency, work went on as usual. But the depressed realtor sat in his office. He didn't want to work. He thought about the guy who died of a heart attack. He didn't want to believe in the demon that Grandma Long said. At that moment, someone walked in on him, which distracted him from his thoughts. An attractive girl came up to him and asked him to help her rent out the haunted room. He told her that someone had died there last night, but that didn't deter the girl, and she used her charm to persuade him to rent her the apartment. She wanted to have a live broadcast there. Realizing that he needed to close a month's quota to get a bonus, and looking at her beauty, he couldn't refuse her lucrative offer. Thus, the haunted room was successfully rented by this girl, who took the keys and hurried to move into the room where the guy's body was found. Ignoring the fact that someone had died in that room, she sat down at the table to eat. She ate happily, not realizing that someone's hand was reaching out to grab her leg. Then she remembered that she had things to do, so she got up and rushed to her bag to get a poster of her idol. She realized that living here alone was a little scary, but it didn't matter because she already had her idol as her protector against demons. She taped the poster to the door, so that it could protect her safely, and the other one to the window so the demons couldn't get in, and she could feel protected. As soon as she finished hanging the posters, the electricity went out, which made the girl feel a sense of dread. In addition, the closet that was closed opened and started making horrible noises. The girl grabbed her bag, while yelling at the demon in the closet that she wasn't afraid of him because she had everything to get rid of him. Then, slowly heading towards the closet, she opened the door and saw a glow of green color inside. When she got even closer, she saw a demon of terrifying appearance. She didn't scream in fear, as she wasn't afraid of it, but instead was glad she had found it. She opened the bag she was holding. A large black crow flew out of the bag and headed towards the closet and flew into it. After that, the girl hurriedly closed the closet door. Grim screams came from it, begging her to open the closet so that he could escape. After the closet door broke, the girl was thrown to the side of the bed. Rising to her feet, she opened the bag, and the bird she had just freed flew back into the bag. It was a black-clawed raven, capable of any demon to reveal its identity. Now that the demon in the closet had nowhere to go, the girl ordered it to come out to her. Enraged, he climbed out and threatened to eat the girl. He looked very intimidating. To anyone else, it would have looked terrifying, but not to this girl. She stood there looking at it as if it were not a sinister demon, but a little kitten. Swinging around, she hit him on the head, and he flew off to the other side of the room. She was sure that this spirit was low level and lacked any damage-dealing abilities and could only scare people by taking the form of a monster. That was why he couldn't see through her disguise. Now that the demon had been discovered, she didn't need to hide and she took on her true appearance. It was Tang Ka, the city's champion spirit invader, even though he had to pretend to be a girl to draw the demon out. Tang Ka was amazed at this demonic spirit's ability to hide, because even the golden nether eye ability that could see everything in the world didn't detect this demon. Realizing who was standing in front of him, the spirit was very frightened. He wanted to run away and hide. He rushed to the door, but was stopped by a poster. Underneath the placard was an amulet that Tang Ka had prepared to block his escape route. This spirit was so weak that without offering any resistance, it reverted back to its original form and seemed like an ordinary sprite. He was terrified and sat huddled in a corner, afraid that Tang Ka would take him from this house. Tang Ka came closer and flicked him on the forehead, asking him why he used to be so strong and now he was so cowardly. He also said that he could catch any spirit in the world. The spirit begged to be spared, saying that he still had to wait for her to come back here, so he couldn't leave. Hearing this, a puzzled Tang Ka made the spirit tell him in more detail what had happened and who he was waiting here for. The spirit told him, "We used to live in an ancient era, but due to us being weak and timid by nature, our only way to survive is by hiding. However, because there are very few that can catch us, we were recruited by the Yao Chengxi to collect information on other demon spirits. We thought that having humans as our backing could make our lives a little safer. We didn't expect that other demons would begin mercilessly killing off our species after finding out that we were working with humans. We were all assigned to one mission, but little did we know, it was a trap. I was the only one to survive the escape. As I was heavily injured, I hid in the cabinet and slept for God knows how long. After I had woken up, the world had changed drastically, with gigantic monsters covered in metal skin and strange towering buildings crammed tightly together. I felt suffocated. You humans don't even want to sleep during the night, always screaming, shouting, and making a ruckus. Truly terrifying. That's why I hid back in the cabinet until a human found me. It turned out to be a blind and lonely granny. Since she was also companionless, she took me in and cared for me like a cat. I felt safe with her. But one day, she collapsed on the floor. Despite not suffering any injuries, she refused to move even an inch no matter how much food I put by her mouth. Then a few days later, she got carried away, and since then, I've been waiting. Waiting for her to wake up and come back to me. The spirit's story was too long. Tang Ka got bored listening to it, so he closed his mouth and took out his phone to scan the spirit and find out who he was. The scan results reported that this particular type of spirit had already died out thousands of years ago, and that its disappearance was caused by other demons. The guy's eyes lit up, and he thought that the reward for this task was 2,000 points. Therefore, there was no need to care about this extinct spirit type anymore. Hence, it would cost more to sell it on the black market. The spirit was frightened when it heard about the black market. But Tang Ka grabbed it and lifted it above the ground, telling it that the old woman it had been waiting for would never return, and it would never have a chance to see her again, even if it waited for the rest of its life. He also told the spirit that he would no longer be lonely, promising to take care of him and naming him Xiaohei. The spirit, having a new name, was very happy and accepted his offer without much thought. At that moment, Tang Ka took the sphere and placed Xiaohei there, and the task was completed. After which he had to report back to the annex about the accomplishment of his mission. But Tang Ka, after a bit of thought, was ready to give up on this mission. Meanwhile, in another part of the city, at a construction site in Liutang, a team of workers were digging foundations and accidentally discovered an unusual jug. It weighed about 500 pounds and required a lot of effort to lift it. Upon its discovery, everyone immediately decided that it was a very valuable find. Someone thought it was a jug filled with wine. Another worker assumed it contained pickles. No one knew what was inside. One of the workers volunteered to open it. When he got closer, he seemed to freeze. The men asked him to tell them what was inside, but they didn't hear a reply. This surprised them, and they thought he was deaf. Large black drops began to fall on the worker's feet. Green smoke seemed to envelop the worker and took over his consciousness. He stood there unable to do or say anything out of fear. Meanwhile, the rain began to fall. The girl was driving her motorcycle. She was trying to get to her destination as quickly as possible to deliver the package. It was difficult for her to get this order, and she only had 5 minutes to deliver it on time and get a 5-star review. She drove a little faster because the road seemed free. There was no one on the road at this time of night. Suddenly, she felt herself crash into something and lost control. A moment later, she was lying on the pavement, bleeding from her injuries. She was about to die when suddenly she felt a black figure crawling towards her. In the morning, Xiaoran slept for a long time, and her aunt came to her house and knocked on the door to wake her up. When she opened the door, Auntie wondered why she always got up late and came home late at night, wondering why her parents hadn't taught her to wake up earlier. However, Xiaoran, even though she was staying with a relative, could only endure and suffer such censure. After listening to her aunt's words, she realized that soon she would have to move out of this house and would not be able to stay here for long. Xiaoran had a purpose in life. She had already saved up half of what she needed, and she only lacked the other half to find her mother. When she finds her mother, she will make her regret for heartlessly abandoning her and her father there for another man. Auntie was a little annoyed and went to find her husband to complain. After all, she wanted to keep Xiaoran at her place for a few days so that she could find a job, but half a year had passed and she still hadn't moved in. But Uncle didn't mind, for Xiaoran was his niece. He said that if he didn't take care, who would take care of her? These conversations made Auntie feel uneasy. Not wanting to stay home and continue this conversation, she went to the supermarket to buy the necessary groceries. Then, after patiently waiting for her aunt to leave, Xiaoran left the room. She apologized to her uncle, but he didn't seem to mind. Then her uncle told her to get ready for breakfast and wash her face. Xiaoran obeyed him and went to the bathroom and began to wash her face. At this time, her uncle stood outside the door and looked at her with an extremely perverted face. Xiaoran felt someone looking at her and turned around. Uncle was already beside her. He had just finished eating and had come over here to pick up the dental floss. The girl wanted to hand him the floss, but since her hand was wet, the man said he would take it himself. Then he reached out and began to nuzzle her body, admiring her hair, which smelled delicious. Looking at her breasts, he remembered taking her to play with him as a child and not expecting her to grow so quickly. Then he got close to her ear and whispered that he knew how much money she had in her bank account, and it was impossible for a girl of her age to earn such a huge amount of money. He said he would give her a large amount of money if she obeyed him. But Xiaoran turned around and kicked him hard in the groin. She couldn't think that her uncle was a wolf in sheep's clothing. At that moment, she had already realized that the last relative she had turned out to be a bad person. She went back to her room to get her things and leave. She had to look for a new place to live. It was dangerous to stay in this house. Gathering her belongings into her suitcase, she went outside. Xiaoran felt hungry and thought she should have breakfast before leaving. She saw a family where there was a dad, mom, and daughter. They were laughing and eating at a cafe, a little sad. She quickly overcame the sadness by reminding herself that she needed to make enough money, and that her goal was to make $140 for the day. She worked as a model from 9 in the morning, earning $40 for it. Then she would rush to lunch and run to her second job. She worked as a waitress in a restaurant from 1 o'clock in the afternoon, earning another $45. The employees were somewhat puzzled that such a pretty girl was working as a busboy and inquired with the manager. The manager smiled and informed the guy that despite her looks, she was doing 3 jobs a day. He didn't understand why she put her life in danger to make money, but he knew she loved speed, and working as a delivery girl was what she liked best. She went to Lantien Street to deliver the goods, and when she rode her motorcycle past Tang Ka, he felt something bad. The black compass in his pocket jingled violently. When he took it out to examine it, he saw countless red threads. These threads were tied to Xiaoren's body. Tang Ka had heard as a child from his master that these threads meant bad omens. Black compass, able to seek out people, items, or demonic spirits, also able to decipher good or bad luck. He felt sorry for the girl, but everyone had their own fate and Tang Ka wanted to help, but he couldn't, so he just stood by. At that moment the phone rang and Tang Ka had a lot of tasks to do, but the one that caught his attention was a rank A task, so he accepted it and started to do it. At the same time, something happened at the construction site. The first group of people who discovered the mysterious jug disappeared, leaving only their clothes behind. As a result, the others began to look curiously to see where the men had gone. But all they discovered was that there was a lot of water in the jug and that something was about to emerge from it. Suddenly, a strange creature appeared right in front of them, frightening everyone, though they started to run away, but it was too late to escape. The dried-up corpse dragged everyone towards it, squeezing them into a large round ball. All the workers from this construction site were pulled into one giant ball. Then they lost all their lives and turned into a dark liquid, which fell down with their clothes. After killing all the employees present, the demon took on a new form and with a loud scream finally emerged from the jug. As he did so, his entire body became much stronger than in his previous form, and he seemed very strong. He was called Mummy. It was the second form of the dried corpse, which for 1,000 years sucked out the qi and able to perceive the state of human souls. The flesh of the mummy had the effect of immortality, and by sucking out human life, it strengthened its spirit. After drinking the energy from the construction workers, the mummy was able to regain consciousness, but could not remember who she was or why she had taken this appearance. At that moment, however, it began to rain, and a drop that fell on the palm of her hand caused the mummy to remember herself. He remembered the person who made him turn into this form, and at that moment, a terrifying aura surged within him. The power embedded in him made him shout out the name of the person who had turned him into this monster, and he wanted to take revenge on him. But the copper nails driven into him began to take effect. They drained the mummy's strength, leaving him exhausted. Without strength, he fell to the ground, but at that moment, Mummy sensed someone approaching. He focused his gaze as much as possible, and realized it was coming, Tang Ka. He didn't know who this young man was, but his premonition told him to run away first, as his body was covered with a large number of copper nails. When he tried to stand up, his whole body went numb, limiting both his strength and all other mobility. He even seemed to have lost the ability to run. But because of his thirst for revenge, he didn't want to die, here and now. He promised himself that he would take revenge on his offender, even if it took 1,000 years, and pushed himself off the ground and soared upwards. Xiaoren was riding a motorcycle when a flash of headlights caught the mummy by surprise and it was too late to dodge. Having been hit, the mummy quickly got to its feet. But what attacked it was so unusual that it mistakenly thought that someone had come to kill it. However, when he turned around, he saw the girl lying on the ground and realized his mistake. Although the girl had attacked him first, she clearly didn't mean to do it. Knowing that he was being hunted, he crept closer to Xiaoran, who was still partially conscious but didn't realize what exactly she had just hit. Since people could not see the spirits at this moment, the mummy began to flow into Xiaoran's body, connecting with every blood vessel on her body. As a result, the copper nails on his body also began to come out and fell to the ground. The mummy was able to take control of Xiaoran's body, his spirit and her blood finally intertwined into one. Only now did Tang Ka arrive at the construction site, but he was already behind on time, because all the workers had already died and there was complete chaos all around. He didn't feel any vitality, but he came here as fast as he could. However, this spirit was able to kill so many people in such a short period of time, which speaks to its power. Tang Ka realized that if this spirit broke free, more people would have to be sacrificed. Therefore, it was urgent to find it. Xiaoran's body was completely under Mummy's control, so she immediately got up and left. When Mummy passed by the wild cat, she immediately sensed the presence of the spirit. But because the cat was also a spirit, it was able to sense Mummy's presence and her power over the girl's body. The mummy paid no attention to the cat and left. But the cat was too vigilant because it knew that it was a very ancient mummy, and such mummies appear once every 100 years. Looking at the girl's uncertain gait, the cat knew that this shower was now very weak, and this was a chance to confirm or deny the rumors, for everyone believed that by eating the mummy, one could greatly increase one's strength. Suddenly, the cat increased in size and lunged at the girl, hoping to gain strength after the death of the weakened mummy. But she made the biggest mistake of her life, because she was immediately chopped in two, with a slight movement of her hand, and even a lamppost was sliced in half by the energy possessed by the spirit inside the girl. After killing the cat, the mummy laughed. It had only used a small amount of power, but it turned out that after merging with Xiaoran's body, it had managed to escape from that horrible pile of copper nails. Now, thanks to this, the mummy had regained his full strength and was confident that no one would be able to stop him. It needed time to get used to its new form. So the mummy jumped into the sky and flew away. Finding a crowded city and landing in it, Mummy became even more interested in the street. The mummy did not know how long he had been imprisoned in the vessel. He was surprised by such tall buildings, and people who were not decently dressed, not like he had seen before his imprisonment. The mummy assumed that they were the children of the inhabitants of the village in which he lived, who had brought him to such a state. So he cried out loudly and promised to take revenge on them all. After a moment, the people felt as if something sinister had taken their breath away. Then the spirit began to use its power to attract the souls of everyone who walked down the street. It was an eerie sight. The mummy grew even more powerful, absorbing the many souls of the dead townspeople. The city commanders received an emergency message summoned by the mummy. The commander, Han Long, who had just taken office, was given such a serious assignment that made her very angry. She was angry because this assignment was received by Tang Ka, and he failed to handle it. But what had he done that caused the spirit to attack in such a manner? Tang Ka was nowhere to be seen, but it was too late to wait. The only choice was to enlist the help of the other world to deal with it. At that moment, her assistant rushed in to announce that the computer calculation data showed that in less than 3 minutes, all the residents of the Lamson area would be dead. Only Tang Ka was in the neighborhood. But given his current location, the assistant was concerned that he wouldn't be able to get there in time. Kan Long had already planned this move, and knew that Tan Ka wouldn't be able to reach the destination in time. Thus, she ordered 2 defenders to be summoned immediately, so they could handle the situation. When the mummy learned that someone had come to arrest him, he reveled in the delightful taste of a human soul. 2 defenders were dispatched to the rooftop where the incident occurred, to get to the bottom of the situation. Upon arriving at the scene and looking around, they discovered that the mummy was just a regular demonic spirit. Consequently, one of them commented that sending 2 defenders here was a bad idea. The other guard, on the contrary, was incredulous, since the report indicated they were facing a mummy. Such an event hadn't occurred in 100 years, and now that it was here, and in the form of a transformed girl, it suggested there was something to it. The smaller defender didn't care. He was charged with energy. He was the first to rush at the mummy to test its strength, but the mummy immediately struck him in the head with a knee, sending the defender flying past his partner and crashing into the rooftop railing. Sensing his power, the mummy approached the second defender. It was evident he was bigger and possibly stronger than his companion, and the mummy decided to test his resilience. However, the mummy suddenly realized something was amiss. He leaped back, desperately trying to stay on the rooftop. In the next moment, the human souls he had absorbed started to scatter, soaring into the air. At that moment, the defender used the ice prison attack, encapsulating the mummy in a block of ice. But the spell didn't bring success to the man. The mummy effortlessly broke free and shattered the icy prison. Realizing the gravity of the situation, the 2 defenders attacked the mummy, needing to stop him as quickly as possible to prevent more human casualties. They employed a spell of incredible power, which could have easily killed any demon. This spell was known as Black Thorns. An unbelievable multitude of spikes pierced the ground where the mummy stood. It appeared as though a wall of iron bonds had been erected around the demon. But these feeble abilities only amused him. He broke free from these bonds with ease. Such actions only further enraged the demon, and he decided to finish with them, sprinting to attack one of them. At this moment, Defender number 7 was concluding the incantation of another spell. This spell was called the Hidden Seal, Dual Seal of Heaven and Earth. The demon immediately felt weakened. He was unable to resist this spell. He fell to his knees, incapable of moving or putting up any resistance. Subsequently, the defensive repose ability was activated, a unique defensive skill of the mummy. Upon its activation, its body becomes incomparably sturdy and resilient. In dangerous situations, when unconsciousness ensues, the defensive repose automatically triggers, forming a protective layer. As a result, the mummy becomes almost invulnerable. The defenders were unable to kill the mummy at that moment. They understood that with this ability they could hold it off for another 2 minutes before the mummy could attack again. Han Long immediately flew out to the location on a drone and inquired about the situation. Nonetheless, it was clear to the guards that releasing human souls from the mummy's clutches was not something they could handle. The problem was exacerbated by the fact that the souls could not return to their bodies until the mummy was dead. And the longer this went on, the harder it was for the spirits to return. Han Long turned pale and pondered whether it was at all possible. Defender number 7 said that exorcism was the only way out in this situation, even though it was not allowed without proper authorization. Her assistant had already heard about this, so possibly the defender was hinting at the legendary Heavenly Seal. She had heard from one of the staff that in the headquarters there was a mysterious relic valued at $1 billion, which contained many powerful spirits that had allowed humanity to remain dominant and in control in this world. The use of the Holy Seal was permitted only with the agreement of the main commanders of the headquarters, which takes a lot of time, so Han Long did not consider this option and hastily ordered the defenders to exorcise the mummy. She paid no mind to the fact that she hadn't sought permission from the higher-ups. To her, human lives were more important, and she had to perform her duty regardless of the consequences. The defender once again confirmed with the commander if they could proceed with the exorcism, and received the final order to begin activation. He began to close the aperture of the Third World gates. Meanwhile, Tang Ka was still swiftly heading towards the location of the mummy. He flew, compass in hand. He learned that there was another demon at the construction site, coinciding with the location he was given. This coincidence was so peculiar that Tang Ka no longer understood what was happening. Suddenly, in the sky from where a golden glow emanated, a huge head appeared, swallowing the mummy right into itself. In a thread of events, Tang Ka unfurled the twisted paths of fate, and much to his astonishment, unearthed a connection to yet another demonic spirit. He couldn't believe how powerful the spirit had to be exorcised in such a manner. It was a difficult task for him to undertake, and he had let it slip away. Only then did he begin to pay attention to the body of the mummy. She was very familiar to him. Surely he had encountered her somewhere before. After a few seconds of thought, he realized that she was the same stunning girl he had passed by in the market. He couldn't understand why she was sent into exile. Quickly tracing her path and using a bronze device, he found out that indeed a demon spirit inhabited the girl's body. However, this occurred because another demonic spirit had possessed Xiaoran, transforming her into the mummy. Having proven to himself that Xiaoran was still half human, and that the demon spirit had merely taken her place, Tang Ka sped up and flew towards the giant maw in the sky to enter a new world. Thinking about how the whole affair was becoming more intriguing by the minute, and what a unique opportunity this was in his life. In fact, he had long wanted to explore a new world, curious about what happened there, and what kinds of demons resided in it. As he flew closer to the maw, the defenders noticed him, and thought the guy must be out of his mind to dare dive into it. Han Long and her assistant also witnessed this scene. In Han Long's opinion, the secret technique just used by the defender was meant to banish the guilty soul, and there was no turning back now. Thus, no one had ever dared to enter there before. But Tang Ka, crazy enough, dared to step in for a thrill. Han Long screamed furiously and swore that even if Tang Ka returned unharmed, she would kill him herself. She was furious and declared that this upstart, though very powerful, always acted recklessly. At that moment, all the inhabitants of the inverted celestial world noticed that a portal had been opened. Thunderclap, finishing off his latest prey, was surprised by this turn of events. He had been waiting for this day, and finally, it had come. He soared upwards and headed straight for the gates, wanting to return to Earth to destroy all those who had imprisoned him in this place. However, this goal proved impossible, as he didn't reach the gates before being incinerated by the boundary. From the once fearsome demon hunter, only one eye remained. Thunderclap could still resurrect, considering his unique ability to regenerate from any part of his body. But he realized that his escape was not imminent, so he abandoned the idea, returned to his cultivation, and vowed that one day he would become the first spirit to escape from this place. Meanwhile, as Tang Ka passed through the opening gates, Thunderclap's eye collided with his face. Thinking it was just a bug, Tang Ka immediately smeared it. Thunderclap was officially dead, with no chance to regenerate. After landing in the new world, he looked around but did not see the girl. Instead, a gigantic spirit named Raccoon Dog had followed him there. Starved of human flesh for a long time, it was eager to taste this unexpected visitor. Meanwhile, Xiaoran awoke in a different location. Waking up, she feared she was late for a delivery. But as she took in her surroundings, she was perplexed, unsure of where she was. Then she remembered hitting something hard, yet there were no injuries on her body. Xiaoran was puzzled by the unfamiliar place. She couldn't recall such streets in her city. As she contemplated and tried to understand what had happened, she was oblivious to the danger lurking nearby. Tang Ka struck the spirit powerfully, demonstrating he was no ordinary man to be devoured, and that he was stronger than any spirit there, as the demonic ones were too weak for him. Instead of attacking, Raccoon Dog began to obey him and kindly agreed to transport him to the place where the girl had fallen. Although he suggested she might already be dead, as many were eager to devour her. In the meantime, a spirit crept up behind the girl and opened its huge maw to swallow her. Noticing it, she braced herself to die, but suddenly, her body dodged the spirit's attack instinctively. Taken aback, she quickly turned and saw the spirit. Realizing it was about to consume her, she hurried to hide. But the spirit leaped in front of her, blocking her path. It was several times her size, and escape seemed impossible. Desperate and acknowledging her vulnerability, the girl immediately knelt down. The spirit showed its back, adorned with mesmerizing eyes, and it seemed Xiaoran began to feel drowsy. She remembered how she first cried when her loving parents comforted her after she fell off her bicycle. Her parents adored her, and it was the happiest time of her life. Being cherished and having a wonderful family, these beautiful moments she still remembered vividly. But that lasted only until she had to cry for the second time in her life when her father fell seriously ill unexpectedly. At that time, her mother did everything possible to gather money for the father's medical expenses. Xiaoran stayed in the hospital to care for her father, doing her best to ease his suffering from the severe illness. 3 years later, her father's illness gradually improved, and her mother no longer needed to work alone to support the entire family. At this moment, Xiaoran stopped crying to show that she had grown up and had become a reliable protector for them. But the good times were short-lived, as her father's illness returned. After that, her strong and loving mother stopped smiling. The next time Xiaoran saw her mother smiling, it was when she was with another man. Her mother didn't want to suffer for another 2 years, waiting for her father to recover. Instead, she found a new man and called her daughter to join her in a new life. But Xiaoran disagreed. She begged her father to stop her mother and bring her back to the family. She promised him that she would work hard and help cure his illness, which was the 3rd time she cried. A year after her mother left, her father passed away. Xiaoran was in despair. The only person dear to her had left her, and she could no longer hug him and spend time with him as cheerfully as in her childhood. It was the 4th and last time she cried. She despised her mother, who didn't even come to her former husband's funeral. Fortunately, her father had other relatives who promised to take care of her, but after a year, it turned out that the uncles and aunts who had promised to care for her had deceived her and asked her to leave, not wanting a stranger's child in their home. Her father's relatives sent the little girl back to her mother. At their meeting, her mother said something that hurt Xiaoran deeply, and that phrase etched itself into her memory for the rest of her life. Before returning to her mother, the girl learned from her relatives that her mother's new husband had gone bankrupt. But she couldn't verify this information until she met her mother. Looking at her mother, she saw that she looked very emaciated and immediately felt sorry for her, forgiving her for leaving her with her father. Her mother must have gone through a lot of pain. When the girl stood before her, she wanted to hear just one phrase: "I regret leaving you." On the contrary, Xiaoran's mother drove her away, saying that she should leave. She no longer wanted to see her daughter. She needed to find money for herself. After that, Xiaoran couldn't recall her face. Strangely, at that moment, the girl was extremely depressed but did not cry. Instead, she felt as though her heart was being torn apart by countless needles, experiencing terrible suffering. It was at this moment that Xiaoran realized that, unlike family and love, money is the most important thing in the world. As a result, Xiaoran made a vow to herself to work towards making her mother regret abandoning her and to stop crying. At the age of 15, the girl started working part-time, evolving into a resilient and enduring individual. To save money, she lived with relatives, working from early morning until late at night. Although she was extremely exhausted, just one glance at her bank account balance gave her strength. However, she now realized that even if she could make her mother regret her actions, she would ultimately have to live alone, without friends or dreams. She pondered what to do next. These thoughts snapped her back to reality. At that moment, a spirit was about to consume her. But if she died, no one would remember her. But just as the spirit was about to devour the girl, Tanka appeared and struck it on the head with his fist, making the creature forget its desire to consume a human. Tanka was relieved to see that the girl was still alive and immediately told her that he was there to rescue her. Hearing this, Xiaoran cried even harder. Tanka did not know how to comfort her and did not understand why she was crying. Taking advantage of the boy's distraction with the girl, Raccoon Dog tried to slip away. At that moment, Tanka noticed that the entrance to the heavenly seal was narrowing. The demon, failing to escape in time, drew the boy's attention, who asked how long it would take for the entrance to close completely. Raccoon Dog said that after half a cup of tea had been drunk, the entrance would close. Just half a cup of tea? Tanka smirked. That was plenty of time for a bit of fun. Meanwhile, the spirit that attacked Xiaoran got up and turned its back to the boy to charm him. These patterns had a hypnotic effect. Looking into these eyes on the back could be fatal, but that was only for someone else. Thinking the boy was no longer capable of resistance, the spirit demon decided to eat him. That was a reckless decision. Its powers had no effect, and Tanka delivered a devastating blow, sending the demonic spirit flying for miles. As the demonic spirits pursuing Tanka caught up, he turned and told the girl to sit quietly and not interfere. It was his time to have some fun. In the human world, this ability is so destructive that he rarely uses it. But here, there are no humans. This world is full of demonic spirits. So he decided it was the best time and place to use his power. It was one of his 4 abilities, named Borrowing Lightning. Upon activating this ability, he enters a state that allows him to unleash various types of lightning-fast combat moves. The demons were closing in, and Tanka met them with a bolt of lightning. The force of the lightning strike was enough to engulf all the demons in its arcs, instantly stopping their movement. Having killed all the demons with one ability, Tanka was exhilarated. He had not had such fun in a long time, but his time in this world was almost up, and he needed to try to return to Earth. He turned around and smiled at the girl, reminding her that it was time to return. Seeing that Xiaoran just sat there, Tanka approached her to make sure everything was all right. On closer inspection, he found that Xiaoran was breathtakingly beautiful. He lifted her into his arms and told her to be quiet and hold on tightly. Then, Tanka activated his second talisman with his foot, and the wind tossed them straight into the sky. Xiaoran saw that he had jumped, but being afraid of heights, she screamed and clutched his neck tightly to avoid falling. Meanwhile, back at the headquarters of the city, Commander Han Long was still boxing, waiting for the boy to return so she could teach him a lesson. Tanka held the girl tightly and tried to penetrate through the open gates. The pressure was mounting, and it seemed they would be torn to shreds at any moment. As they approached the earth, the mummy once again began to take hold of the girl, and a black veil began to shroud her eyes. Time was running out. The dragon's maw was almost closed, but at the last moment, they managed to return to Earth before the seal closed. He landed on a roof where 2 guards awaited him, who were utterly disappointed that he brought the mummy back to Earth. They had exerted so much effort to expel this spirit, and here he was bringing it back. At that moment, the mummy began to take over Xiaoran's body. Her eyes turned completely black, and it was evident that she was no longer in control of her body. Seeing this, Tanka slapped her face. This seemingly simple action brought the girl back into her body. But from the slap, or because the mummy left the girl's body, she fainted. This scared the defenders. It had taken them a lot of strength to control this spirit. But it took the boy just one slap, and it was all over. However, they needed to ensure that the girl had regained control over her body. Tanka brought Xiaoran's face close to them to prove she was now human, not a mummy. They had to come to terms with it, and the 2 guards no longer needed to interfere. She had become human again. They activated the portal to send themselves back since their work here was done. Han Long ordered an immediate return to headquarters to explain what he had done. Tanka agreed and returned with the girl. She was unconscious and was fitted with an oxygen mask. The best doctors tried to understand what had happened to her. They examined her, Apart from her brain waves being slightly abnormal, her body was completely stable and functioning normally. The man reported to Commander Han Long. He said that the system had informed them that most of the souls had already returned to their bodies. Fortunately, they managed to deal with the demonic spirit in time. Otherwise, the number of casualties would have exceeded manageable levels. However, at the construction site from where the demon spirit had escaped, none of the workers could be saved. More than 100 people died there. After hearing the report, Mrs. Long immediately grabbed Tang Ka by the neck and started questioning him. He had volunteered for this mission but allowed the death of over 100 people. He tried to explain that he did everything he could to save them. But he didn't arrive at the scene in time, and Mrs. Long calmed down a bit. She realized that if Tang Ka hadn't taken on the mission, the consequences would have been much more severe than they were now. Meanwhile, the doctors were trying to figure out what happened to the girl's body. After all, this girl was a demonic entity. The doctors attempted to take Xiaoran's blood. They used the largest syringes, but they couldn't even penetrate her skin. They had to use force. One of the doctors took a drill and tried to take the blood. After obtaining the blood, they displayed the results on a monitor. Commander Long and Tang Ka watched and saw that the blood was normal and indistinguishable from that of an ordinary human. But at that moment, an anomaly appeared that no one could explain. The doctor looked into the microscope, trying to understand what was happening with the girl's blood. In an instant, the microscope was destroyed by her blood. Just one drop of blood could be so powerful. The monitors stopped giving a signal, which was very strange. They had never encountered such an abnormal behavior of human blood. One of the doctors reported that all of the girl's indicators were normal, but there were several electrical impulses in her head belonging to the mummy. Preliminary analysis showed that the girl's condition was no different while she was conscious. However, when the mummy's brain waves took over her body, it turned into something demonic. Thus, it was concluded that this body belonged to both the human and the mummy at the same time, and no one knew when the mummy would completely take over her body. Now Tang Ka understood that the demonic spirit had merged its cells with Xiaoran's body. That's why the two defenders on the roof didn't understand this. It was just a regular soul possession. Everything was too simple. At that moment, Han Long looked at him and said he had to choose. The first option was to take care of the girl. The second was to immediately return to the mountain. Upon hearing this, Tang Ka's demeanor changed instantly. He had promised his master that once he left the mountain, he would not engage in any romantic relations with girls, and living with them was forbidden. What he wanted least of all was to return to the mountain he had come from after his training. After some contemplation, he decided that he must take responsibility for Xiao Ran, whom he had saved, and agreed to live with her and look after her. However, he feared that if his master found out about it, he would be taken back to the mountain. But Han Long said she would take care of the issues with the master. Commander Long asked her assistant to find a way to get Xiao Ran out of the headquarters without anyone knowing. As for Tang Ka, the commander ordered him not to disclose his involvement with the Heavenly Seal. Moreover, he was to be cautious with the girl and not leave her side by more than half a step, for they did not know when the mummy of the demonic spirit would awaken again. Tang Ka left, burdened by recent events, feeling responsible for the tragedy. After Tang Ka left, Commander Long told her assistant not to worry about him. She knew he was only using 10% of his capabilities, and dealing with the mummy would be very easy for him. Tang Ka was going home, despondent over the prospect of living with his younger sister, believing that a challenging life awaited him from that moment on. Suddenly, threads of murder began to emerge from Tang Ka's back, which stretched across the entire city, reaching the mountain where Tang Ka had undergone training with his master, the very place he was reluctant to return to. His master, seated on a massive tortoise, was well aware of everything happening in the city. A moment later, Han Long called him. He didn't need to speak with her to understand what she was about to say. Han Long was very angry upon realizing that the master knew everything and that nothing had been kept from him. He told her that he knew all that had transpired. Otherwise, he would not have decided to let Tang Ka leave the mountain. He was Li Chuan, a 17th generation sect member, the master of the secret sect. Like his disciple, he was quite self-assured, considering himself the strongest master of the sect. Han Long, frustrated that she could hide nothing from the master, hung up the phone. At that moment, Xiao Ran awoke in an entirely different place. Her body glowed with a white light, startling the girl. What was even more terrifying was the demonic mummy standing right behind her. Only now did she have the chance to see it face to face. She remembered that this was the same ghost she had encountered while delivering goods, and she grew curious as to why this creature was here. The mummy began to move towards the girl, frightening her even more, and with a single finger movement, Xiaoran's body suddenly lit up and then began to disperse into the space. This scared the girl even more, and she suddenly woke up in bed. Could it have been just a dream? The girl then started to comprehend where she was at the moment. Moreover, the attire she was dressed in was completely different from her previous one. Pulling off the blanket, Xiaoran discovered that even her panties had been changed, which embarrassed her greatly. Someone had fully dressed her while she was unconscious. Everything was confusing. She tried to recall recent events. When she regained consciousness after the accident, there was a monster on the road that wanted to eat her. Then a strange guy appeared and barely saved her. She did not know if this guy was real or not. Or was it all just her imagination, since she always wished someone would protect her? Perhaps it was just a dream, and she made it all up. At that moment, Tang Ka entered the room, flaunting his torso, startling Xiaoran. It was no illusion. It was the stark truth. She immediately understood that it was he who had changed her clothes. And realizing this only made her more indignant. She thought he was a good person who saved her, but he took advantage of her when she lost consciousness. Xiaoran grabbed a pillow and threw it straight at his face, not even giving Tang Ka a chance to recover and see what happened. She lunged forward and struck him right in the groin. But it was she who ended up hurting. Tang Ka was upset that he had saved her, risking being left in another world, and now she treated him this way. He explained that she had been caught in the rain and was wet. He didn't want her to get sick and had asked for her to be bathed and her clothes changed, which astonished the girl even more. She realized that this guy was not alone in the apartment. Then he called the one who had bathed the girl, and to the girl's surprise, a giant demon spirit entered the room. Xiaoran got scared and quickly retreated to the bed to hide. This terrible creature had actually bathed her. At this phrase, she felt chills running down her spine. The spirit realized that the girl was frightened because of his unpleasant appearance and cried. Tang Ka was annoyed that the girl had hurt the feelings of the kind demonic spirit, and told her not to judge by appearances. Although the spirit looked so large, it was only 5 years old. Xiaoran quickly apologized to him. He might look fierce, but in reality, he was a kind spirit. She asked him to explain what was happening here. Tang Ka then shared with her several tales of how humans and demonic spirits live side by side. Mortals like her, he said, cannot see them. And he also mentioned that she too has such a spirit within her. This threw Xiaoran into even greater confusion, with more and more questions arising in her mind. However, Tang Ka was not able to explain everything to the girl, and asked the demonic spirit to explain on his behalf. The demon spirit approached Xiaoran, ready to answer all her questions. They sat on the bed, and the spirit began by saying that the reason Xiaoran was here is linked to a request from the city's demon hunting headquarters. With too many questions from the girl, the demon spirit decided to start from the very beginning. Initially, humans did not possess the strength to oppose these malevolent demons. Consequently, humans often found themselves prey for these entities, the spirit began. However, as time passed, humans with extraordinary abilities emerged. They stood up valiantly to challenge the demons, establishing an organization known as Esoteric. They took it upon themselves to safeguard humanity from these threats. With humans now able to fend off demons, the killing dwindled. Yet, this shift prompted world leaders to regard Esoteric with wariness. The spirit continued. Esoteric members became the hunted. Seizing the chance, demons orchestrated a massive onslaught against humans. By then, Esoteric lacked the strength to resist. In desperation, the founder of Tao Esoteric utilized a jade artifact to seal away most of the demons. This relic came to be known as the Heaven-Flipping Seal. After this incident, a truce known as the Armistice was brokered, under which the remaining demons and humans could coexist peacefully. Yao Chengxi was established to oversee the demons residing in the human realm, and those with harmful intentions towards humans. Upon hearing this story, the girl was bewildered, confronting for the first time the reality of demons coexisting in our world, which she had always thought were mere legends. She was also curious to learn more about the demon that, according to them, lived inside her. But this question was redirected to Tang Ka, who was standing nearby and had also been listening to the story the benevolent demon was recounting. He approached the girl and told her that it was time to address an important matter. instructing her to lie down on the bed. As Tang Ka drew nearer, Xiaoran felt a surge of fear and insisted that he clarify his intentions. He explained that, as mentioned earlier, there was a demon spirit within her, and it was growing stronger. Now, should Xiaoran fall asleep, or even for a moment lose her vigilance, the demon spirit would immediately seize control over her body. Xiaoran was somewhat terrified upon realizing that the demon spirit the boy mentioned might be the very one she had encountered in her dream. Seeing him cross his arms and prepare to do something to her, she was gripped by fear. She thought he was about to cast a spell and was afraid of the unknown. Tang Ka preferred not to give too many explanations. This was the first time he had employed this method. He folded his hands and placed them on Xiaoran's forehead. She promptly lost consciousness. But in an instant, Tang Ka also closed his eyes and collapsed, unconscious. The demon looked on in surprise at the unfolding scene. They lay side by side on the bed, looking for all the world like a couple in love. Suddenly, Xiaoran came to her senses in a strange space, one she recognized from before she had awakened. Tang Ka was standing right next to her, explaining that this was her spiritual world. The technique he had just used is called mental journey, which allows him to penetrate into the mental realms of others. The situation was dire. Xiaoran's spiritual body was gradually disintegrating. Countless fireflies were flying away into the sky. These were the fragments of Xiaoran's consciousness. Should they completely disappear, her official death would follow. Her body was transitioning into the possession of that demon mummy spirit. But now that Tang Ka was here, there was no longer a need for concern. Tang Ka made his way straight toward the demon. This was the first time Tang Ka was fighting on the level of consciousness. Just the thought of it was intriguing. Looking at the mummy, Tang Ka could tell that it seemed to have regained its consciousness when it started moving its arms and legs. The demon mummy spirit realized that this man was the very one who had recently pursued it, attempting to expel it from the girl. Although it was only the spiritual world, the mummy was enraged at the boy and screamed, believing that his enemy named Bowen had sent Tang Ka here to capture it. But Tang Ka had no idea who the mummy was talking about. Suddenly, the mummy struck him in the head with a knee, followed by another blow. These hits created a void in his mind, and he was thrown back several feet. It seemed like serious damage had been dealt, but the boy stood on his feet, not even considering surrendering. The mummy began to understand that this was no ordinary human. His aura was very strong, and it realized that it needed to flee. Tang Ka seemed like an average human, but a lethal aura emanated from his body, which frightened the mummy. Tang Ka's head wounds healed instantly, even though it was a powerful strike by an S-rank monster. But now it was his turn to strike back. The mummy knew that it was in her subconscious, and she was a formidable opponent for the boy. Here, the demon was a god who had made a copy of himself to take control of Tang Ka by capturing him immediately. He was very confident that this would help keep the boy at bay. Even if Tang Ka was strong, in the subconscious, he wouldn't be able to destroy the copy that held him tightly in its embrace. And that wasn't all. He also created countless copies of himself. With a snap of his fingers, an entire army of mummies surrounded him to protect their creator. With such a large number of copies, the boy had no chance of winning the fight. Now it was time for a counterattack. The mummy said that although these were copies, their speed and strength were no less than that of the main body. Then, he ordered his copies to destroy the boy, and they proceeded to carry out the command. The mummy was confident that in his subconscious, he was invincible, and he laughed loudly, hoping that he would soon teach the uninvited guest a lesson. Tang Ka's face remained impassive. Did this weak spirit still want to kill him? He freed himself from the controlling clone in an instant, and then transformed into a giant. This was his true form. Until this moment, he had pretended to be weak so that the mummy would activate all her abilities. He thought it would be a good fight, and was looking forward to having fun. But then he realized that this was a weak opponent, and would be easy to deal with. Sensing danger, the mummy quickly ordered the clones to retreat. The entire group attempted to flee from the giant, but it was too late. Tang Ka, with his gigantic body, lay down on them, destroying all the clans at once. He lay there, not understanding how an S-class demon could be so weak as to not put up any resistance. Tang Ka showed him what true strength was. He snapped his fingers and struck the mummies directly in the face. That was enough to defeat the mummy. At this point, Xiaoran's consciousness also returned, and she regained her normal appearance. Tonka reminded her that she needed to hurry up and create a picture or something of the sort to seal the mummy. Since this was her mental world, only she could create anything. The girl pondered for a long time, which annoyed Tonka, who urged her to hurry. Otherwise, if the mummy woke up, all their work would have been in vain. In the end, she finally managed to complete the task. It wasn't a pitcher or a jar she created, but a lipstick to seal the mummy's consciousness. Having finished their task, they both left the mindscape and returned to the real world. Suddenly, Xiaoran awoke and, seeing Tanka approaching her face, screamed in fear. He explained that he did it to check if she was all right. He had woken up some time ago and, noticing she wasn't waking, feared that the demon spirit was still not fully controlled. But now, the check was complete. Confirming that the mummy's demonic spirit was sealed, there was no longer a concern that it would seize her body again soon. Xiaoran, frightened and puzzled by the fact that the mummy still resided in her body, asked Tanka to help her get rid of it completely. He understood the girl's anxiety. It was unclear why this demon spirit, first causing chaos at the construction site and then entering her body. Since she was half human, half demon, the city's defenders were still at a loss on how to handle the case. They had not encountered such issues before. But until they figured out a solution, Xiaoran had to stay put and not leave. This caused her vehement refusal. She could not stay in the house with strangers. Moreover, he was a man, and she feared that he might have ill intentions toward her and take advantage of her vulnerability, especially since she was no longer certain who had bathed and dressed her. And after she woke up, he was almost kissing her. Tanka didn't understand what she was talking about. He didn't even know what a kiss was because he lived in the mountains and had no interactions with girls. He was a demon hunter, and girls did not interest him. Hearing his response, she calmed down a bit and thought that perhaps he was telling the truth and wouldn't harass her as her uncle did. What she had to endure in her childhood left scars on her psyche, and she was distrustful of men. Tanka did not listen to her and left. He didn't understand what she wanted from him, but as he walked away, he reminded her that the demon spirit was still inside her, and if she left, he wouldn't be able to protect her. She was puzzled and didn't know what to do, but asked him what he would do if she decided to leave. He said that if she stayed close to him, he would try to protect her, but if she left, he would not stop her. Therefore, the decision was up to Xiaoran. Thus, she had to agree to stay here for the night. Leaving was a bad idea since she had nowhere else to go. After all, Tanka had saved her, so she could afford him some trust. After she lay down in bed, she thought about how strange everything happening to her was, yet the place was comfortable to sleep in. After some contemplation, she fell into a deep sleep, not even noticing something emerging from under her blanket. The next day, Xiaoran suddenly awoke when the sun was already high above her head. She thought that everything that happened yesterday was just a dream, but now she had to accept the fact that she would have to live in this room with a boy and a demon inside her. Xiaoran didn't know what to do in this situation. Getting out of bed, she looked out the window and screamed. The loud noise prompted the demonic spirit and the boy to come and check on her. It was early morning, and the scream was so deafening that they had to cover their ears. They thought something terrible had happened, but upon entering the room, they saw Xiaoran looking out the window. So many events had happened last night that she hadn't paid attention to the room she was settled in. She hadn't expected the city view from the window to be so beautiful. She realized she was in the tallest building in the city. Xiaoran slapped her face several times to understand whether this was a dream, because the tallest building in the city was the most grandiose structure there. Describing its scale in words seemed impossible. The rent for apartments in this building was inexplicably high because it was located right in the city center. The higher the apartments, the more expensive they were, and the more beautiful the view from the window. And she was standing almost at the very top floor. It had been her dream to visit this place. Tanka didn't understand what was wrong with this girl. She screams early in the morning and then stands muttering to herself. He thought she had screamed because something was protruding from her back. Xiaoran turned around and saw a long tail that had grown on her. She didn't immediately realize it was her own tail. So engrossed in the panoramic view of the city, she hadn't noticed that her body had changed overnight. Suddenly, the tail lashed forward to attack Tanka. Although it was unexpected, he nimbly dodged the tail, but the tail continued to pursue him. Not wishing to fight with the girl, he moved towards her to knock her down and stop the tail's attack. But before he could reach her, he realized the tail was hurtling towards him, and he evaded the attack by pressing to the ground. After he dodged, she managed to stop her tail right in front of her face. Then Tanka began to teach the girl how to control her tail. It was quite sharp, and Xiaoran could wield it very skillfully. He tossed an iron bottle into the air, and her tail immediately sliced the bottle into 2 parts. Bringing the tail back to position, she realized she could control it. Tanka's eyes lit up when he saw this. The tail was so cool, he wanted one for himself. His words provoked an angry scream from Xiaoran. She didn't like the tail sticking out from her back at all, especially since Tanka told her he had sealed a demon inside her. Tanka ordered the great demonic spirit to try attacking Xiaoran so he could see how powerful the tail was. The great demonic spirit found this somewhat dangerous for the girl, but having no other option, he was compelled to follow the order and attack her. He used his very long hair, directing it towards the girl to capture her. But at that moment, the tail automatically began to block all the demon's attacks, not giving him a chance to grab her. It was an impressive sight. The girl stood motionless while her tail independently defended its owner from the threat. Deeply impressed, Tanka deemed it enough and commanded the great demonic spirit to stop and approach the girl. Drawing closer, he decided to show her the strength of the tail, mentioning that it could be considered a Class B demonic spirit. Her tail acted instinctively when a threat was perceived. As he spoke, he clapped his hands sharply in front of her face, startling the girl. The tail instantly mistook him for a threat and began to attack. But since Tanka was stronger than her, the tail couldn't harm him, and he effortlessly caught it with his hand. It was incredible. Even after sealing the demon inside her, she could use the demon's abilities. However, the girl didn't like its appearance. She feared that people would be frightened if they saw it. Tanka couldn't understand why she felt this way, as he thought the tail was very cool and could protect her. But she was embarrassed by it. After pondering a bit, he remembered that she used to have a horn that she managed to hide. Perhaps it was also possible to try and conceal the tail. He advised her to concentrate and try to hide the tail. Xiaoran didn't understand how it was possible, since the tail was so long, but she agreed to try, especially since she had no other choice. She focused on the tail and tried to will it to disappear with her thoughts. A moment later, she was surprised and overly joyous that the tail had become very small and she managed to hide it. Tanka congratulated her and mentioned he needed to return to work, and she should stay at home. He also added that he had never encountered such cases where a person and demon merged into one and did not know how to counter it. So nothing remained but to simply observe how the situation would develop. Xiaoran smiled sweetly and said that since she had become so strong and could further develop her skills, she wanted to work with him and catch demons. Such a declaration surprised him. He did not expect to hear such a thing, wondering how such a delicate girl could hunt for demons. Not wanting to indulge her fantasies, he said he had work to do and took his phone to read the new assignment. But at that moment, the smile vanished from his face when he read the message. The organization decided to temporarily terminate all your tasks. Keep your eyes on that girl. Wait for my news. Xiaoran asked if everything was all right, wondering why he suddenly stopped and lost his smile. He turned around, showed her the message on the phone, and said that he was officially out of work now. If this captivating story has struck a chord with you, please share your thoughts in the comments, and I will definitely prepare a continuation just for you. Your opinion means a lot to me, and I am eagerly looking forward to sharing the next chapter of this thrilling adventure with you. Thank you for watching, and see you soon on the channel.